Okay, I'm looking at handout 1.7a, Thompson's argument. So it's kind of, I called it 1.7a just because it's still part of the Thompson discussion. And so make sure you have that handout. It's on Blackboard, and there's an argument there. So there's so much going on in Thompson's paper. And some of you pointed out like so many examples, so many cases, it's hard to figure out what's going on. And it might be even tempting for some of you to just be like, ugh, there is no answer to this. It's too hard. And I want you to resist that because I'd rather what you think about is not to say there's no answer, but I need to think about this slowly and carefully to get to the bottom of this. But we don't say this about, we don't give that, we don't that's what I encourage because we don't have that sort of response in other areas. Let's say you're studying something about really hard biochemistry or something really hard in physics and it's really complicated. You don't just say, this is so complicated. There must be no answer. Well, there is an answer. It's just really complicated and it's really hard. Sometimes reality is hard, physics is hard, biochemistry is hard, and the truth about whether abortion is right and wrong in circumstances is also hard. Remember, right now we're assuming ethical objectivism, that there is a truth out there about whether there is a right or wrong. Some of you disagree with that. You might not believe in right or wrong, or you might just say right and wrong is just whatever I feel, like the simple subjectivist goes. That's an easy way out of all of these debates. Then you can just kind of ignore all of this and just say, well, I feel abortion is right, and then it'll be right. Or you can just say, there is no morality. But we're assuming ethical objectivism so that there is some truth about these matters. So, all right, to help us get to the bottom of this, I formulated Thompson's argument in premise form, 3 premises and a conclusion. So I'm going to read it and you can follow along with me. In a case of protected sex where a fetus is conceived, the mother has not assumed the responsibility of taking care of the fetus. Premise 2. If the mother has not assumed the responsibility of taking care of the fetus, then the fetus does not have the right to use the mother's womb. Premise 3, if the fetus does not have the right to use the mother's womb, then it is permissible for the mother to have an abortion, unless this is a minimally decent Samaritan case. Remember that Thompson thinks that in cases where it's really easy for you not really easy, but she thinks that it's wrong for the older brother not to give chocolates to the younger brother, or if it's a very late term case, then the mother does have an obligation, Thompson thinks, to have the abortion. So that's why she wants to rule out these minimally decent Samaritan cases where it's not that hard for you. One more example is you're only plugged in for 1 hour to the violinist. Okay, conclusion. Therefore, in cases of protected sex, it is permissible for the mother to have an abortion unless this is a minimally decent Samaritan case. So if you're going to write your argument analysis on this topic, I'll say this. I think this topic is a little bit harder than the other topic just because there's a lot more there and a lot more to explain. Which the next topic is on Marquis, which that'll be your next lecture. I'm going to give you some suggestions for objections to Thompson that have been raised and for you to think about. I'm going to leave it to you to figure out to which premise this objection applies. So that's going to be some of your original work. Okay, so think about, so I'm going to start giving some objections now. Here's going to be 2. First, Thompson, one is, that Thompson wants to say in the case of protected sex, the mother has not assumed or consented to responsibility for taking the child. Is that true? She supports that with her burglar case, but you might still say if a woman has sex knowing of the possible consequences, that still does give her, that does still mean that she is consenting to that possibility. So maybe you can try to argue for that. Okay, that's objection number 1. I'm leaving it a little open so that you have space in your argument analysis to maybe fill out and try to defend it. Next, you might wonder, well, suppose I didn't assume responsibility for something. Does that mean that that thing doesn't have a right to anything of mine? Like, let's say if you're the mother. And some people have argued, well, think about fathers. Okay, let's say a father has sex, there was birth control, the father, leaves for a trip, and then maybe they're in the army, they're overseas, whatever. They come back a couple years later and they find out that the their the woman, their girlfriend, spouse, whatever, went ahead and had a child. Okay, in this case, Thompson would want to say that the father did not assume responsibility. But don't we want to say that that baby, and as that baby grows up, the baby has some rights to the father's help, attention, fatherhood? Maybe so, but if that's the case, then something's wrong with one of Thompson's premises. So I hope I didn't make it too obvious, but it's up to you to figure out how the objection I gave applies to one of the premises of Thompson's argument. Okay, and and this might mean that earlier objection, that motherhood or fatherhood, might mean a little bit more. That assuming responsibility isn't where it's all where everything's about. Maybe there's something to these blood relations. Okay. Uh, Next is sometimes we don't explicitly assume or consent to something, but we end up having responsibilities over them. Suppose I'm walking by and I trip, and then I accidentally spill some soda on you, or my smoothie, and I drop a smoothie on you. Okay. Now, even though I didn't assume responsibility for your clothes, it does seem like I have some moral obligation to help pay for your clothing, and that the other person has some right to my help to pay for the clothing. But I didn't assume responsibility for your clothing, right? So what's going on here? Okay, so this is another example to help you think about possible objections to Thompson's argument. It's going to be up to you to figure out exactly to which premise the objection is going to apply. Lastly, I'll note this. When you're objecting to a premise that is a conditional, like if x then y, then you want to try to find a way that you want to try to find a way in which you could have x without y. So let's say premise 2 says, if the mother has not assumed the responsibility of taking care of the fetus, then the fetus does not have the right to the use of the mother's womb. To argue against premise 2, you have to argue for how it could be the case that the mother might not assume responsibility for the taking care of the fetus, but yet the fetus might still have a right to use the mother's womb. That's how you would argue against premise 2. All right, so I hope that made sense. Again, you can always email me with questions, and officially we're done with Thompson after that.